panel members.
Okay, how are we going to start this? We get to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
One end and work down the other, so.
All right, I think this whole presentation tonight is to tell you how we got to where we are, and hell if we know. So I think we ought to start with Joe Nick down at the other end of the table. And you just tell us how you got here tonight.
By car. No, it's when we're talking about music journalism, this is a good time to be discussing the subject because all of us are music journalists of one form or fashion, and in fact are expressing our ability to communicate about music by writing with the printed word in many forms and fashions, online, in books, in archives, in all kinds of ways. And I kind of laugh when I hear music journalism because a lot of the discussion we had before was, people hanging on or how publications are doing, are they still around? And it's a very different landscape than when I got started in the early 1970s. There was a music business, and it was fat, and all of a sudden there was interest in trying to cover this business, and really the art that this music was, that this business was manufacturing, and look at it seriously. It wasn't just a confection. It wasn't just sales numbers or units. It was all of a sudden looking at music, rock and roll music, young people's music, and increasingly country music in the 70s. People taking it seriously. And yeah, it's a 3-minute poem set to that rhymes and set to music, but it is a form of communication, and all of a sudden people were taking it seriously. And you had a period when there were publications like Rolling Stone and Bibles for me like Cream magazine, that I really consumed music as much through the publications as I did through actually hearing music. Today it's a whole different landscape. It's whatever you're into, you know where your tribe is, and you can find your tribe online. Even if you're into, I'm into obscure Afghani trance music from the 70s. You might not find that person here in San Marcos, but your tribe is online. That there's a bunch of people that are into the same thing you are, and they're communicating. As far as monetizing, making a career out of expertise by commenting on something like that, I don't know how you do it today, but you're supposed to know how to do it. All I'll say is that when I started out, it wasn't much of a living to be a music journalist or a music critic or have your byline in Rolling Stone magazine. You were still working, 2 or 3 other jobs trying to support your habit. So in that respect, it hasn't really changed that much. But if you're good at it, you do it long enough, and you establish a voice and some expertise, you might wind up doing what I'm doing now, which almost a little bit too much, is I'm looking back, and it's stuff that I witnessed and experienced or wrote about in the 70s and 80s. All of a sudden, there's great interest in that if I was an eyewitness. So, whatever you're experiencing right now, it's going to stay with you for a while, and if you document it with your words, there's a good likelihood that if you're good enough, people are going to be asking you about this 40 or 50 years from now. That said, just take your vow of poverty and get a day job or two that can support your habit, or live with someone that's got a day job, and then go to it.
I think that's the best advice we're going to hear tonight, so thank you for coming. I should have said, tell a little bit about yourself before you start, and I know everybody is familiar with Joe Nick. I wrote a whole paper about him, but I would like for you to hit a couple of high points of some of the things you've done, and then we're going to do that with everybody else.
I used to run a record store in Fort Worth and Minneapolis, and I worked in radio in Dallas, Fort Worth. But I'd always, I guess, mainly in college, I started writing columns about music. And it was just, no one was doing that. And I got tired of hearing people say, oh, that's great, or that sucks, and that's about as much as people would express themselves. No, 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 no. Explain yourself. So I did a couple of reviews and sent them over the transom to Cream Magazine when I was working at this record store in Minneapolis. And I got a $30 check and a letter back from Lester Bangs saying, you write real good, you ought to write more for us. And I mean, you know, $30, and I've got a good day job at the record store. Gig is great, but it's Minneapolis and all that. So that kind of prompted my move to Austin to write about music in 1973 with the idea about writing about music. And I drove cabs, and I clerked in record stores, and I did all kinds of hustling pretty much up until 1980. But by then I was, starting in as early as 75, I was freelancing for Texas Monthly Magazine. I was stringing for Rolling Stone. I was doing a lot of correspondence stuff. And then I got to be such a smart ass thinking I knew about, I'm writing about music and I know so much about it. I got into business. A friend of mine that had a band got my girlfriend in the band, and that was Joe King Carrasco and the Crowns. And I got tired of giving them nickel advice, and so I managed them for 5 years. And went to Europe multiple times, South America, saw them travel up and down the United States, you know, Saturday Night Live, MTV, all that business. And it was great fun.
You married a band member.
Yeah, well, and my girlfriend and I eloped from tour in Berlin and married ourselves on the Pont Neuf in Paris. And I'm still married to that woman.
Did you know anything about? Did you know anything about managing when you started managing?
No, I just thought I knew what I was talking about. In fact, it was funny because at one point, all of a sudden, you know, the band had 15 minutes in New York where they were the hot thing. And I've been reliving that recently with that Go Nightclubbing film series that was up at the Austin Film Society. And everybody wanted a piece of it. And like, you know, Jerry Wexler calling me up, you know, let's go to Muscle Shoals and make a record. Well, how much are we going to get for that? I'll give you $500. And, you know, no. And you know, Lauren Michaels bringing Paul Simon backstage. And this was, I think Paul was on the prowl looking for Texas women at the time. That was before Edie Brickell. There's stuff like that, and it was great fun. And you know, it was flirting with a lot of the business, and Joe King got to a level, and then that was it. The band wasn't going to go anywhere else, and everybody else, you know, in the business. Well, what else you got? Who else you got? It's like, no, this is what I've got. And basically, I learned I didn't want to be a manager. Most managers in the music business, they're really creepy people. And it's just a matter of nature of the business, and the artist has to be the good person, and the manager is the creep. And I didn't want to be the people I was supposed to aspire towards. So my wife then got pregnant and quit the road and quit the band, and I went back to writing in 1985, and was lucky enough that my old friend at Texas Monthly, Greg Curtis, had become editor, and he tried me out with a couple stories as a freelance, and then I got hired as a staff writer. So I did that up until 2003, and I've been freelancing ever since. Leaving Texas Monthly allowed me to write books, and the books that I've been doing. I love books because you can really dive in deep and wallow, and it's dense, it's long, it's really a terrible way to make a living. It is a horrible way to make a living, and there's a lot of anguish involved with it, but it's very rewarding as far as something that just, like books, they stay here. It's not like a magazine. Magazine's there for a month or two, or maybe if you're at your parents' home, you get a stack of magazines and you read something, but books seem kind of permanent. I like doing books, you know. I paused with books and I directed a film as well. It's all about music. It's because I love music. And if you love something and are passionate about it, that's what you should always, it's write what you know. That's what Greg Curtis advised me in Texas Monthly. And write like you talk it. You always say that. But on top of that, it's have the curiosity to expand what you know. And never be afraid of being curious about things. And never be afraid of sticking your business into strangers' faces and asking them questions. That's the best part about the writing gig that I know of.
But don't discourage them from being creepy managers, Joe, because there's a future in that too. There's a lot of managers.
Everybody needs one. So if you want to be that hired asshole, go on. But that wasn't me.
Hector, let's give us a little background on what you are and what you've done, because you've got a lengthy list, and what you're doing now.
Well, my name is Hector Saldana. I'm the curator of the music collection at the Whitlow. And but before that, I was a music writer at the San Antonio Express News for just shy of 20 years on staff, but 24 years total writing about music. And the way I see it, music journalism, it can mean quite a lot of things. I mean, one, you could be, I don't know who's out there exactly the audience, if you want to be a writer, or maybe you want coverage. I mean, part of music, journalism sometimes is understanding what, first of all, is a story interesting, or can I make that story interesting? But if you're out there and you're trying to get noticed, your band noticed, or your project noticed, or whatever you're doing, you need to make a concise pitch to an editor. You need to sort of know what the topic is about. But anyway, at the San Antonio Express News, I wrote about music almost exclusively. But when I first started, I was writing about comedy and dog shows and just about anything on the Metro beat. And I soon learned, just like about anything in life, about 99.9% of the gig is being there. So, it's one thing to be a fanboy or a fangirl about a certain group or something, and inevitably there's going to be, someone will always know more about some music band, some band than you. But, I used to kind of go into, whether it was writing a review or a story, to really try to get, to kind of find out what was happening in front of me, to sort of be those eyes and ears for your reader, because a lot of times you can kind of get sort of lost in the weeds, but then your audience can't follow what that story is about. So, if for those of you that are writers, a good I come from the newspaper side, but I've written a couple of stories for magazines, but a good story obviously has a beginning and an end. It is not just a recitation of all the facts. It's not a Wikipedia entry, and neither is it every quote. Sometimes I've seen some stories and it's just all one long quote. There should be a sort of a flow and a narrative to a story, and I'm kind of rambling here. I should follow my own advice, but but that's, if I was advising a young writer, I would say go follow your passion, as Joe Nick said. Try to use descriptive words to say what you're seeing or what you're hearing, and then make it interesting, because the worst thing you can be when you're writing something is boring. You'll lose your readership right off. And so, I'm old school, and they used to just drum it into your head, write bright and write tight. And what that means is get to the point and, start it and get it over with. So that's my bit right there.
I think it's worth mentioning, though, that just for context, that Joe Nick managed a band, and Diana, as Joe mentioned, ran a venue. Hector's the only one up here that I know of was and is in an actual rock and roll band.
Yeah. So
going way back.
Beginning in my teenage years. So I've been on both sides of the sort of the equation. Begging for coverage or trying to get noticed, and And then you learn also that a lot of times, a newspaper is about news, so is a magazine. And so, if you're making news, you will probably find someone that wants to cover it. If you're kind of going through the motions, it may not be fully formed yet as far as what you're trying to do. Mr. Skanse?
I think probably in high school I decided I really wanted to be a writer of some sort, and I kind of gravitated towards music, and just high school paper, college paper. Went to college in San Antonio and started working at the San Antonio Current, the alternative weekly down there. Became like the music editor or music columnist for about a year, and a couple years later ended up moving to New York, and not with any real plan, but took an unpaid internship at Rolling Stone, and ended up working there for 5 years. This is like mid to late 90s, right when kind of the internet was kind of really hitting its stride, and they just kind of launched rollingstone.com, and we were still on America Online at the time, a lot of the services, but that was my niche. I got the features editor of the online department, and I loved it because I could, the magazine at that point it's still in a better place than it is now, I would say. Probably not when Nick was there, but it was our writing for him. But it was still very much, they do test studies, like, do you want to see this person on the cover, that person on the cover. Online is such like an uncharted territory. I could write about anything I wanted, basically. And so like I did a Rolling Stone country site, because I had just moved from Texas, and like I'd kind of like right before I left here to move to New York, I discovered, or knew to me, like Joe Willie and Billy Joe Shaver, and these local artists are just like, God, these are great. And I moved to New York, where they're not all around you, but I could write about them up there. I was like, I'm writing about Joe Willie for Rolling Stone. I got a kick out of that. And anyways, so I did some stuff for the magazine too, but I ended up I really wanted to come back to Texas, and this, when I was down there for South by Southwest one year, met a guy named Stuart Ramser, who started a magazine called Texas Music, and ended up doing an article for like his first issue, or a couple of them. And when my position got cut at Rolling Stone, like a year later, I called him up and said, like, do you need an editor still? And he said, yeah. So, first chance I got, I moved back to Texas, to Austin, and edited Texas Music for 10 years. And before I kind of got burned out there, but I just, gave me an opportunity to write about all these artists that I really respected, and some that, just wrote about them because they were interesting, or had, this is the 2000 to 2010, early 2000s was really when the Texas music scene was kind of really resurging. It's gone through phases. Had a big, first big push in the early 70s, I would say, and then there are different movements, but really at the end of second half of the 90s and first half of the new century, it really hit its kind of a new peak. And so it was a good time to be writing about that. And anyways, so 10 years later, I moved to another magazine, Lone Star Music Magazine. We had a record store here in town, Superflies, and now we're not doing the print magazine anymore, but we still have the online presence, LoneStarMusicMagazine.com, where we got all our archives. And it's kind of slowed down a bit. I'm kind of at the tail end of that part of my chapter, but it's just kind of still an outlet to write about stuff I'm passionate about when I feel the tug. And I'm not I don't know where I was going with that. Let me just pass.
You're not
it on.
retired.
I'm not retired yet. Not dead yet.
Yeah, not dead yet. Still not dead yet.
Hopping on one leg.
There you go. I'm Diana Hendricks. I began my career in journalism, as everybody else here did, in high school, college, decided that's what I wanted to do. One of my first interviews in college for the University Star was with Willie Nelson when he came to play in San Marcos before Chillimpiad. We became, at that time, friends. He was a lot more accessible back then. He played several things out at the Civic Center during my college years. Joe Nick, were you here when he did Willie and Friends, Do It for a Friend for Just a Main?
That's vaguely familiar. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that was like the biggest show that ever happened in San Marcos at the time. And Just a Main was a country singer-songwriter, had been in a bad accident, came back. Willie got everybody he knew to come and play at the Hays County Civic Center for something like $8 a head, which was big money, and in 1980, and raised a phenomenal amount of money right there. And I think that probably taught me that this is a really good business to be a part of. A lot of times we forget that music business is 2 words, and as music journalists we do that a lot. It is 2 words, and that's why we need those managers and those creepy guys, because they do remember the business side of it. But I ended up spending a great deal of my career writing for anyone and everybody who would give me a check so that I could keep a beer joint open, so we could keep music on the stage. And we did a pretty
What
good
beer
job
joint?
of that. Oh, that would be Cheatham Street Warehouse.
Well.
I co-owned that for
Her words.
Well, not just another pretty place was the first tagline, and it turned from that Luckenbach kind of beer joint mindset to an amazing music hall, and that gave me a front row seat and a backstage pass to some of the most phenomenal music that I was ever and probably will ever get to see be developed here. I had babies sleeping on pool tables and children on my hips, and today you could probably toss any of my kids an accordion or a saxophone and they could play it, but just don't throw them a football, because that just wasn't part of our life. We were really fortunate with the family and friends that we let them grow up with, and that I grew up with down here and on our sofa at Martindale at the Get Along Ranch, which Halliana still proudly owns and maintains. My daughter Halliana is sitting over there. So we grew from, this beer joint with fun honky-tonk music that Kent loved to say, to a real music hall. And I was lucky enough to be able to write a lot about that. And so I had a homemade subject matter anytime I wanted it. And I went from publication to publication, stayed fairly close, was the managing editor for Chili Monthly magazine, which was when the chili cook-off world was really big, was a national publication, owned and funded by Carroll Shelby, the race car driver and car developer. And it was funny to see how all these worlds collided and came together because of music, and I think that's why we're all here right now. My life has continued with my foot in the back door of the music world. I've been lucky enough to have some amazing mentors, and Joe Nick is one of them. I had the opportunity to write, here's my plug, look, everybody's got a book. The current book that I have out now is with Texas A&M Press, and it's about Delbert McClinton, the first book written about him. And I'd like to take a minute and talk about writing books, because Joe Nick touched upon it. I know about academic presses. He knows about Little Brown and the big guys. And there are great things about each of them. Several friends and colleagues have said, how do you get a book deal? And you have to be proven, and sometimes you're a good writer, but you still have to show that the subject is a good subject. And with the Delbert book, I was able to first place a piece in the Journal for Texas Music History here at Texas State, which is one of the finest Texas music journals, not just Texas, but one of the finest music journals in the academic world. That led Texas A&M to contacting me. I think one of the most important partnerships that we at Texas State have made came with the John and Robin Dixon series at Texas A&M. At Texas State, we don't have a press. We don't have a publishing house. Texas A&M does. John and Robin Dixon, who you're probably all familiar with because of the Steamboat Music Fest and things like that, they host those, the River Fest. John endowed a series of music books that has become highly acclaimed through Texas A&M and in a partnership with the Center for Texas Music History at Texas State University. So we're lucky right here that we've got this connection. If you write about something that hasn't been written about or hasn't been written about thoroughly enough yet, and you can get it into a journal, academic presses are going to be interested in it. That's kind of a step 1, 2, and 3. I can speak to that and 2 other projects I'm working on right now, but Joe Nick could speak further to the big world, because what he didn't mention was that he wrote the definitive Selena biography. He wrote Caught in the Crossfire with Bill Crawford about Stevie Ray Vaughan. He wrote the Willie Nelson An Epic Life book, which I have a whole shelf of Willie Nelson biographies. A lot of them were kind of co-written by him until he lost interest. This is the definitive one, as I wrote in his magazine. And the Dallas Cowboys book. And one thing I learned from Joe Nick is when you're writing about a subject, the subject doesn't have to just be about the Dallas Cowboys. That book is more about the times and the places and Fort Worth and Dallas and the culture in that time than it is about 2 teams colliding on a football field. I tried to do that to emulate his lessons to me in the Delbert McClinton book, because Delbert walked through this amazing part of life and was part of a lot of music scenes as well as just other parts of life. He, on November 22nd, 1963, he saw John F. Kennedy about an hour before he was assassinated, driving to the Air Force Base in Fort Worth, getting on a plane to go over to Love Field, where he would then travel in the parade motorcade. So there were a lot of things like that that were a part of the book that I learned. And so I say all this to say, while you may want to write about music and that's your passion, look around the music, because the music is the social movement of our time. Greg Andrews, who's sitting back here and is the president of the foundation, created a study of music and social movements. That's a graduate level class at Texas State now. And basically it talks about the social movements that have been pushed and developed and supported through music. And so look around the music and see what's happening beyond that.
Let me just add, Diana, to that, when I was thinking about what you're saying, music journalism or just journalism, a lot of times, you can have a whole book about just a moment, so a lot of times a writer or journalist, it pays to be a good listener and a good reader, or just listening or being in tune to that special moment, because you can be writing about a topic, right? But there's going to be certain things that jump out, and if they jump out to you, it's likely they will be interesting to someone else. And so that is part of the aspect of I think what everyone here on this panel does and has done. It's kind of, to be a writer, you have to kind of open up your heart a little bit, try to capture the emotion that the subject or the music, hopefully good music has a lot of emotion. And so, again, it's kind of, music journalism or journalism, it's not only about the writer, and it's not only about the topic, it's about the reader as well. You're sort of the conduit. That's how a lot of times how I felt at the newspaper. I felt like I was trying to be the conduit of that story. So I was trying to, make it interesting, bring out those elements that, that are fascinating. Like, for example, I wrote a story about, I was curious how a high school football team that had just carried their teammates' coffin, could go out and play the game that night. Sometimes a story is just about a moment, and so little things like that, or like one time covering a concert review, and I won't mention the artist, but she broke down, it was a Christian artist, and she broke down on stage completely. And I knew, well, this review is not about what song she's singing. Is she singing good or bad, or did the people clap? But she started talking about her parents breaking up, and suddenly that's the story. So part of writing is knowing sort of what to write about, and then once you kind of know, finding those instances, those little magical things that keep you sort of, the writer on that quest to learn more about it, but also will keep your the reader, which is a big part of the equation, engaged in what you're doing.
Well, it's the writer, you're the communicator, and it's what you choose to bring out for the reader, to present to the reader, the viewer, whatever. That camera there, what's that camera doing? Who made that camera? What's it standing on top of? What's the camera's purpose here? What's the context? And again, that's where, it's what you zone in on, and what makes music journalism kind of a whole other thing beyond journalism or any other realm is this ethereal thing called music. How do you use words or even just verbal descriptions to describe music? It's like Frank Zappa said, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. It's very hard to pin down, but that's, to me, the great challenge and the beauty of even discussing the idea of music journalism. And people are doing it. They're expressing it in many different ways and finding many different means that afford them to do it. And it's not what I was raised up to be, to hope that you work for a magazine or a newspaper or a book publisher and you get paid money and you get rewarded for your work. It's not that simple anymore. But the need for people to describe it, to communicate it, to put things in context and explain is probably greater than ever. It's just you got to figure out what's going to be it can be your passion, but also can just be your obsession. And no matter what the subject is, if you're good at trying to analyze it and communicate it, you will get obsessed with it. You don't have to be in love with it. It doesn't have to be passion. But you do have to get obsessed if you're going to do a good job and communicate to other people what it's all about. You're doing their heavy lifting for them. You're the one that has to suffer and string these words together. It's not easy.
We
I'm going
just
to cut
got
it for
the.
just a sec, and I hate to interrupt. Just want all your songwriters to know, this is Cheatham Street. We are having songwriters night after this, and so the list is out at the bar. We didn't do the big old ding, so you missed the cowbell. But if you're a songwriter, please get your name on the list at the bar so we can hear your songs tonight during Songwriters Night on stage.
What, we invented one.
You still have time, yeah. Keep
Okay.
going.
Why don't we open it up to any questions? Anybody have questions?
I'd like to know what Richard was trying to say.
I was just, I want to ask y'all's opinion too on like, if you see a distinction between music journalism and music criticism. I think when you're younger, I thought they're like one and the same, maybe they are, but I kind of figured out early on and started writing that like, I've never thought of myself as a music critic. I mean, I'll write reviews and I probably, I've written my share of probably, critical reviews, but usually I'm kind of not conscious of not wanting to come off as too fanish, but like if I really want to write about something, it's going to be usually something that I'm excited about. I want, other people to hear it. But usually I the stuff that I would gravitate towards and really want to write, if it was an artist or an album, I'd want to tell the artist's story or get to, the circumstances around, why do I like, what is it about that record or that artist's work that fascinates me more so. And I feel like there's definitely now with it all being online, you have blogs, and I feel like mostly what you see on blogs and stuff are like just reviews, and it's just people, here's my opinion on this, And I don't see as many like just, the in-depth, my model is always like, I'm sure they're just long form interviews. Like I love the old style, like Rolling Stone, like pages and pages of Q&As, like the single Q&A where just like, wow, I got so in depth with that. And that was kind of like what I did with Texas Music and Lone Star Music. I mean, I always, hopefully I didn't go over too much with quotes, but like I always wanted to go long, kind of really go in depth instead of just, surface, here's repeating what is in the press release or been written about. But back to my question was, do you see a big difference between music criticism and music journalism, or like what you do or how you approach it?
I used to do a lot of record reviews. I guess the last publication was, I did some No Depression and Paste. It's been that long ago. And you listen to something, you pass judgment. It's just like, it's brain fart almost. And if you feel really great about something, then you fight to do a lead review, something like that. But these were just like little, they're almost just bite-sized chunks. And that's not when you get to do an artist and do a profile and try to get to what this person's thinking, the story behind the music. They could be oil people, they could be chauffeurs, but they happen to be musicians. And that's really the way a journalist should approach it, is you're doing this profile and you're trying to get to the meat of, why are we even reading? Why am I writing about this person? Why is anyone reading about it? But you definitely want to try to get more detail. And in times like that, you don't pass judgment. I mean, you can pass judgment, and occasionally that's done if you got to call, if someone's just been a complete dick, it's okay within that, even if you're doing a straight up story, is to call them a dick or basically infer there's a lot of dickishness going on. But you should, I try to do it straight ahead. And I always let the subject is what drives the story. The problem with all that, and this is what was great going back many years ago, is there weren't as many filters and handlers. All these, spokespeople. The first time I encountered that was, I think in 74, 75 was ZZ Top, and they had three guys with them while I'm interviewing the band. It's like, and they're always interrupting what they really meant, what Billy really meant to say, or what was really on Frank's mind here. And it's like, let the dudes talk to themselves. They're adults. They know what they're doing. And that was my first encounter with the layers that you have to cut through now. And that stuff, I usually won't try to do it. I wouldn't waste my time doing a profile then if I have to deal with a handler going between. It's not worth it. So, but you're doing music journalism by profiling or by telling people. I think it's the really great job that music journalists have done. And when it quit being just, rewriting PR stuff in the age of Rolling Stone, was turning people on to stuff. And I remember when reading a review of Ed Ward's in Rolling Stone, he wrote about Little Feat and put out a single and it was about a song called Strawberry Flats. It was about an acid trip in Waco, Texas, and I was hooked. And I never heard the record before. And it's like reading, when I read Lester Bangs or Richard Meltzer, but Lester in particular, I didn't care what he was writing about or what the music was like or whether I liked it or not. I wanted to read his description of it. And to me, that's being a journalist. And he was so passionate. He'd go over the top. He'd be crazy too. But that's what I wanted to read. And it was almost like listening to music.
I've got a question. I think we'll probably need to end on this, if that's okay for all of y'all. It's a little bit theoretical. You've been in the industry long enough. Richard's touched on the rise of digital and that kind of thing in his talk. What do you guys see as the future of music journalism with the advent of digital technology and online, or for that matter, the future of music?
Well, that's all we used to, coming from
Hector's got a day job.
no, but Yeah. Well, I can tell you on the newspaper side. I mean, we had weekly meetings, sometimes daily. I mean, this is a topic that consumes, any print publication. First of all, how to get readers, keep the readers you have, and what's going to interest them. And then it's a very good question, Jason, because a lot of times now stories are driven only by clicks, and then a lot of times those page views are very dependent. Is that on the home page? Is that the first thing you see? How far removed is that? So if they're burying, if your music story is buried in newspaper, just say XYZ publication, but you can't find that story, and then the editor in the meeting goes, well, your music reviews, no one gives a shit about those, no one cares, so we're not going to do those. See, that is now sort of the marching orders. The editors and the managers are beholding to people that are looking at that at those page views, at that traffic, and are using it sometimes to justify coverage. So, and then their justification for either not having a music writer or not bringing someone on or not doing those kind of stories. So, as I see a lot of young faces out there, as you get into journalism, I'd say, it's a lot about, pushing for that. Don't let the system bring you down. But also, I would say though, there's room for great writing and great, they call it content now instead of stories or articles or Q&As. But there's a big need for that. But it's just sort of being up to speed on what the game is and learning how to navigate that.
The music industry died, supposedly, the fat and sassy music business in the mid-90s. And the digital wave basically swamped it. But as I sit here today, I look at South by Southwest, there are more bands applying to get into South by Southwest and more bands showcasing at South by Southwest than ever before. People are making music for all the wrong reasons, but they're making music. And if you can figure out an expertise within that realm, there's a place for you. It could be you're the person that's here every night at Cheatham Street, and you know all about all these songwriters in that scene. When it comes time for someone looking for, who knows about Cheatham Street? Oh yeah, well, Jane over here is always here and writes about it. She's the expert. The great thing is, it is, the world is flat. Getting yourself heard amongst all the noise is not easy. But with blogs, you can write all you want, and you can write as much as you want, and you can go find your audience. And if you can find that audience and start communicating with them, you've got something going. Because once you get enough people paying attention to what you've got to say, then all of a sudden you're advertising bait. And theoretically, there's a place for you. Your platform may not be the newspaper that I once worked for, and it may not be in a book form, but there is a need for content, and there is a need for people that know what they're talking about and what they're writing about. That's stronger than ever. So it's like, if you're ready to jump in, jump in. I mean, this is a great time to do it. But don't think anyone's going to hold your hand, and no one's going to let you hold their wallet. You're going to have to earn your way in.
Hector, tell us a little bit
Right.
about what's coming up next, since I know
Sure.
that these guys are ready to sing.
Okay, well, I don't want to mess up your Saturday on April 14th, but let me mess it up a little bit and invite you all to the Whitlow. No, some people, I'm saying make your plans right now. I'm saying I'm giving you some options. But we're having an event called Literature That Rocks, and the idea was, sort of like a little mini music festival for authors like Diana and Joe Nick, and also maybe a little book festival for musicians where we're going to have people like Joe Ely and Augie Myers involved, and Holly Gleason and Michael Corcoran, Jesse Sublette, the Skunks, Eddie Wilson. But we're going to have a late morning panel and an early afternoon panel on Saturday, April 14th. It's free. We will have lunch there as well. So it'll be more time. But also Rachel Lavin will be performing, singing. She's a great singer-songwriter, a new folk winner at Kerrville Folk Festival last year. And I always encourage folks to come to these events because it is a chance to get up close and personal. with those artists, you know, and they can probably answer a lot of those very detail-oriented or very specific questions that I know that audiences tend to have at panels. So if you have a chance, put us on your calendar for Saturday, April 14th. Literature That Rocks at the Whitliff Collections at Alkeck Library at Texas State University.
Yes, you have a question?
I know you guys are tying it up, but honestly, I'm a creative writing graduate, and I see that a lot of people are here because they were asked to be here as a part of their course. And I actually have a question about, though it's amazing to have a book published, I've seen how paper publications have gone kind of out of business, and there's more stuff like rollingstone.com. And I would just like to know, is having an online publication as important as having something on paper? And is there, we've talked about blogs, I just want to know, is there anything we can do as students right now to write about bands we're seeing here in San Marcos right now and start working on music journalism?
Let me make can I make just a quick suggestion on
Yes,
that,
sir.
or an answer like real world. First of all, for most newspapers have internship programs. The San Antonio Express News and the Houston Chronicle are Hearst Corporation owned newspapers. They have internship programs where you can write online and in print. They definitely any.com, not any, but you know, there's a lot of good